Commander of the Knightly Order of the Crimson Lions. This order was established to protect the Rhodas Empire and the imperial family. Under Kalia's guidance, the warriors of the order impeccably carried out their duties. All the neighboring countries feared them. Kalia herself was regarded as the empire's finest swordsman and the hero who halted the long and bloody war. And Kalia Taxicate is pregnant. She sits before the mirror, holding the test in her hands, unable to believe what she sees. 2 lines. How could this be? Female knights are infertile due to their rigorous training. She believed she was infertile too, but the test does not lie. Finally realizing that all of this is not a dream, Kalia jumps with delight around the room. Yes, it was her lifelong dream. She was an orphan, surviving on the city streets as best she could. And then she saved the life of the 6-year-old son of the Duke. In gratitude, the Duke welcomed her into the order. And there she achieved the heights she aspired to. But beyond her career, Kalia always dreamed of having her own child. And now her dream has come true. The father of the child was named Simon Turlone. He was a young and tall handsome man with light violet hair and olive eyes. He was the chief archmage and duke of the Rhodas Empire. It was him whom Kalia saved when he was 6 years old. And then she fought side by side with him in the war. Simon was Kalia's closest friend. And now he is the father of her child. It was just one chance encounter, and here is the result. Well, whatever fate may bring, she now has the most precious gift, and she will protect him. But there was one problem. The Duke's family would never accept an illegitimate child, especially from a homeless orphan. They were so arrogant. Kalia only felt their coldness. She couldn't tell them about the child. What about Simon himself? He despises people. Will he be thrilled about the child? Moreover, it seems that he is interested in another woman, and he plans to marry her in the future. As for Kalia, he is like a brother to her. No, he shouldn't know that he is the father. She has enough money to raise the child on her own. It's unlikely that anything more than friendship is possible between her and Simon. But what about her prestigious position? What kind of family responsibilities can the commander of an elite order have? Surely they will demand that she get rid of the child. That cannot be allowed. There is only one solution. Kalia must relinquish her post. She approaches her luxurious ceremonial uniform. Scarlet, embroidered with golden buttons. Simon said that gold preserves magic best. Kalia dons her uniform. She puts on her scarlet cap, dons her plated boots, takes her faithful sword, and drapes over her shoulders a blood-red cloak with a white lining. Perhaps this is the last time. The war has ended. It is time for the hero to depart. Kalia descends from her room to the hall in full parade attire. Hamming Gallus, Kalija's enthusiastic armiger, rushes toward her. She adores her commander. Kalia is an exemplar and idol for her. Hamming strives to please Kalia. She fusses around her and then hurries to the stables to fetch Kalija's personal stallion, White. He is a snow-white and elegant steed. He was personally granted to Kalia by the emperor. Kalia is already preparing to saddle him when she suddenly remembers her position. She asks Hamming to hitch the carriage. Hamming is surprised, but she fulfills the request. Kalia enters the carriage and heads to the palace. On the way, she ponders how best to inform the crown prince of her resignation. In the palace, she meets Duchess Elena Turlone with a procession of ladies-in-waiting. They gossip about Simon giving Princess Michelle a bracelet with magical engravings. Michelle wants to know more about Simon. Elena is Simon's mother and Kalija's foster mother. Everyone admires her nurturing nature, but they don't know the conditions in which Kalia lived. She was assigned a distant and dark room in the wing and dined with the servants. And to meet Simon, she had to seek permission from Elena. Elena smiles affectionately at Kalia, but that smile is hypocritical. Behind it lies coldness. Therefore, Kalia responds to her with chilly politeness. However, the news of Simon's relationship with Michelle leaves a bitter taste in her heart. In Prince Lemon's study, Simon stands by the window. He spots Kalia and waits for her arrival. Prince Lemon suspects that there is some connection between them. He even speculates that it happened 2 months ago at the celebration in honor of Kalija's victory. Since then, Simon has been somewhat different at times. He becomes lost in thought or retreats into his fantasies. And when he sees Kalia, he becomes deeply moved. Now, when Kalia requests an audience with the prince, Simon prepares to leave. However, for some reason, he chooses to exit through the window instead of the door. Perhaps because Khalija is already knocking at the door. Simon can be disrespectful, but he is a supreme archmage. The grandeur and power of the Empire rely on his magic and Khalija's martial arts. Undoubtedly, these two are the most important individuals in the state, and there is Khalija, present in full parade attire. But today is a day off, so why has she come? Right from the threshold, Khalija declares her desire to retire. Prince dropped his pen in astonishment. He assumed he misheard, but Khalija reiterated her desire to retire as soon as possible. The prince doesn't understand the sudden decision. He nearly stumbled in his agitation, but Khalija managed to catch him. She states that she needs to rest, but a regular vacation won't suffice. She needs to live in peace. However, if she is needed, the prince can always summon her, and she will return. She simply needs to leave for a while. She cannot disclose the details, but perhaps she will have a family. The conversation ended, and Khalija exited the prince's chamber. She must hasten and depart before the rainy season begins. Otherwise, it will be impossible to leave. And before her departure, there is still so much to accomplish, including meeting with Simon. She recalled that day once again. There was a celebration in honor of their victory over the pirates. Everyone was drinking and praising Khalija. Simon pulled her aside and gave her a glass of water to sober up. Then he suddenly took her hand and said he had something for her. Khalija was surprised at the time, but Simon reminded her that it was her birthday. That's what he called the day when she was officially accepted into his family. Only Simon remembered it, and they went together to the top of the enormous magical tower, to Simon's laboratory. There, he presented her with a box of magical scrolls. He gifted such sets every birthday, and he made them himself. This time, the box contained a white scroll that could conceal its owner's traces within a radius of 20 kilometers, a violet teleportation scroll with a range of up to 100 kilometers, a green healing scroll, and a special scroll that could summon Simon himself. While telling her about this scroll, Simon gently touched Khalija's cheek with his palm and caressed her ever so slightly. Khalija felt flustered and brushed his hand away. This angered Simon. He began to speak of Khalija's insensitivity and her failure to notice certain things. But an alarmed Khalija didn't listen and simply attempted to escape. It was in that moment she saw the scroll on the table. Pink-red, exquisite, shimmering, enticing. It stood out among the others, and Khalija liked it. She took it in her hand and read it. The scroll was from Master Derek, a highly skilled mage. It stated that if there are feelings, the body will follow them, and physical arousal will be proof of the existence of those feelings. Simon noticed the scroll in Khalija's hand and asked her to give it to him because it was a very dangerous scroll. It reveals whether two people are in love. It must be torn apart by two individuals, and if they have feelings for each other, they will experience desire. They will be unable to tear themselves away from each other, kissing and caressing each other madly. Simon's words unsettled Khalija. She turned away and intended to pour herself a drink to hide her embarrassment. And then Simon said that if there are no feelings, nothing will happen. He and Khalija have nothing to fear. Khalija fails to comprehend the purpose behind his words. Simon elucidates that he simply wishes to test the scroll. Hence, he requires someone who does not harbor feelings for him. They are merely friends with Khalija, so she should assist him. This is in Simon's nature. He frequently employs people to validate his scrolls. Even Khalija has fallen victim to this on multiple occasions. This time, however, she has decided to decline. Simon deems her refusal as evidence of her love for him. Hence, he fears tearing the scroll and exposing himself. Such accusations provoke Khalija's agitation. She erupts in fury and tears the scroll in half. The anger subsides immediately, replaced by a tender lightness within her chest. Khalija gazes upon Simon and sees him in a new light, radiant and alluring. She desires to kiss him endlessly, without restraint. Finally, Khalija finds the strength to overcome her obsession. She turns around swiftly and departs. Simon catches up with her at the tower's exit. Yet Khalija refuses to engage in conversation with him, mounts White, her horse, and heads back to her estate. However, after traveling a few meters, Khalija turns around and gallops her horse back to the tower. She rushes towards Simon and demands the immediate neutralization of the scroll's effect. Simon intends to say that it is impossible, but Callia interrupts him with a kiss. Callia spends the entire night with Simon and is now expecting their child. She feels ashamed. It was only one night, a mistake, and now this. Callia interrupts her reminiscences. Now she needs to meet Simon in the present. There he waits for her in the royal garden. Simon claims that she had supposedly been avoiding him for a long time. However, this is not the case. She attempted to apologize for what happened twice, but he grew angry at her words. Therefore, she refrained from approaching him further, and now he refuses to accept her apologies. He asserts that a mage of his caliber fears no scroll. It is not about the scroll at all. Callia interrupts him and reiterates that she did not want to ruin their friendship with passion. These words enrage Simon, conjuring fire that engulfs the royal garden. In a fit of rage, he hurls at her that it is pointless to explain anything now. He departs for 2 weeks to construct magical circles. He promises to clarify everything upon his return. He is about to leave when Callia asks if he still dislikes children. Simon is taken aback by this question. Callia explains that he himself recently mentioned wanting to get married, hence her curiosity. Simon responds that he still despises children to this day and is unlikely to ever love them. Callia solidifies her belief that he need not be informed about the child. In the evening, while pondering about Callia, Simon contemplates her fearlessness as a warrior, yet acknowledges her lack of intellectual brilliance. Therefore, why did she inquire about his marriage and his views on children? Then, after that night, Callia fled from the magical tower in the morning before he woke up. And then, a girl entered the tower without permission. Her name was Luina, the Princess of Elens. She had long red hair and was adorned in a magnificent blue gown. And in that morning, Luina directly proposed to Simon that she wants to marry him. She arrived at the tower with a marriage proposal. Simon promptly refused her offer. The rejection infuriated Luina, and she insinuated to Simon that she understood what he and Callia were engaged in. However, Simon remained indifferent. He had already realized that he loved Callia. For 7 long years, he couldn't express his feelings to her. There was war, and there were more pressing matters. And then, the long-awaited victory and the night with Callia. And what happened afterwards? She apologized for that night. What could be more insulting? Simon became angry and refused to see Callia for a long time. But suddenly, Callia saw Luina entering the tower. Does she really believe that I am going to marry this princess? Simon approached the prince. The prince revealed that he received a letter proposing an engagement. The ruler of a neighboring country demanded the position of Empress of Rojas for his daughter as payment for their assistance in the war. However, Simon was only interested in what Callia discussed with the prince. Knowing the fiery temperament of the Archmage, the prince chose not to divulge anything to him. Meanwhile, Callia appointed Bricca Eucria, the vice-captain of the Imperial Guard, as her successor. Bricca was shocked. He believed that he wouldn't be able to handle such a role. He pleaded with Callia to teach him everything, but she had no time for that. She requested him to assume command, at least temporarily, and not disclose her departure to anyone. Callia was preparing to leave. For the first time in her life, she wore a dress. It was difficult for her, but her attendant, Hamming, assisted her. In the dress, Callia looked stunning. To avoid being recognized, she wore glasses, a wide-brimmed hat, and arranged her hair differently. Hamming discreetly sold the carriage to the backyard. She didn't want to part with Callia and asked to accompany her on the journey. Callia agreed. She boarded the carriage while Hamming took the position of the coachman. They drove past the slums where Callia had spent her childhood. She requested the carriage to stop, stepped out, and surrendered to her memories. But Hamming reminded her that they had to reach their designated destination in time. They arrived at the cafe and waited. Sitting nearby was the son of a cafe worker. He admired Callia's hat. It touched her deeply. She thought about her own child. She offered to have him draw a painting for her, and in return, she would give him a slice of her lemon pie. The child drew her portrait. At that moment, a commotion erupted at the counter. Someone was harassing the cafe owner, demanding alcohol. In the cafe, mercenaries stormed in. They'd rudely mistreated the staff and demanded beverages. They were threatened by the security, yet they showed no fear. By the time the security arrives, they will have overturned everything and vanished. A certain individual rushes to their aid, but is swiftly incapacitated with a single blow. One of the mercenaries had already grabbed the proprietress and was about to strike her when, suddenly, his hand was intercepted by Callista. The mercenaries were taken aback. Meanwhile, Callista forcefully plunged a fork into his hand. The mercenary howled in pain, demanding the execution of the audacious young girl. The mercenaries pounced on Callista, but with a single flourish of her fan, she scattered them all. Then she repeatedly struck the leader's face until he retreated. However, a precisely thrown bottle by Callista left him unconscious on the ground. The proprietress expresses her gratitude to Callista and implores her to help revive the young man who attempted to protect her. She reveals that he is a doctor who had been awaiting his patient here. The doctor's name is Alan Medjiker. Callista had intended to meet him. She transfers him into the carriage. Callista departs. Before leaving, she takes the painting. She also advises the boy named Clark to enroll in the Knight Academy. This way, he will be able to protect his family. She utters the secret passphrase that will ensure him the best educational program. The proprietress is grateful, and Clark is delighted. As Callista boards the carriage, he shouts to her that they will meet again soon. In the evening at Callista's estate, Alan Medjiker assists her in packing her belongings. He is grumpy yet caring. He doesn't allow her to carry any heavy loads. Callista's family physician recommended him for this role. Alan gathers the luggage and exits alongside Callista. The carriage and Hamming await them. Callista tries to persuade her to stay, but she refuses. She remains devoted to her commander. Callista leaves a note for Simon with the butler, boards the carriage, casts a farewell glance at the estate, and departs. Having reached the forest, Callista decides to employ the scroll of instantaneous transportation. The carriage finds itself in a seaside hamlet. The magic enchants Hamming, who has never before encountered it. The locals gossip about the matter. Suddenly, Callista hears the name Simon. Immediately, she returns to the carriage and employs the next scroll. Yet wherever she may appear, everyone speaks of Simon and his wedding. To obscure their tracks, Callista repeatedly teleports. Hamming and Alan are already nauseated. By evening, they finally arrive in a distant, tranquil town called Antic. The carriage descends right next to a colossal ancient tree. On its branches, Callista notices children. Is it not too late for childhood games? They settle into a hotel. At night, Callista cannot sleep. Doubts torment her regarding her choices. She recalls that Simon wanted to tell her something. Somehow, she must inform him about the child. And yet, why does he despise children so? What would he say if she were to confess? Rid themselves of the child? Just the thought of it enrages Callista. Unable to sleep, she approaches the window to breathe in the fresh air. From the window, the same tree is visible, and upon it, the same children frolic. At night, Callista steps out onto the street and approaches the tree. The children begin to whisper. They are astonished that a human can see them. Callista realizes that she is in the presence of fairies. She had heard about them from Simon, but had never seen them before. The fairies have their own empire, concealed from human eyes. Occasionally, fairies appear in our world in the form of children. However, humans cannot perceive them. Therefore, the fairies are astounded. How could Callista see them? They presume it has something to do with the child in her womb. Fairies can perceive children. They inform Callista that she carries an extraordinary child. It emits a radiant glow, unlike anything they have witnessed before. The fairies foretell an extraordinary destiny for the child. Callista departs. Then, one of the fairies tells the others that she too was radiant, not just the child. Perhaps she is not merely human. She simply remains unaware of it. On the following morn, Callia returned to the tree to pay a visit to the fairies, yet they were no longer present. Nestled within the tree roots lay a gift for Callia, a vial brimming with fairy dew. It is comprised of the tears shed by the fairies and possesses marvelous healing properties. Callia graciously accepted the offering. While journeying back, she noticed someone observing her from the hotel window. Adorned with crimson locks and gem-encrusted eyes, Callia recognized him. It was Prince Worf Audio of the Kingdom of Akan. She pulled her hat low over her eyes and swiftly retreated to her carriage. Unaware of her identity, Worf's curiosity piqued as to who she was and what she had been doing by the tree. He had long been tracking the fairies himself, even holding one named Melina captive in order for her to observe other fairies. Hence, Worf summoned her and compelled her to gaze at the tree. Alas, Melina beheld no fairies. This greatly dismayed Worf, as he lamented the futility of his efforts to cure Melina. Subsequently, he summoned his court magician, Timon, who conjured a lightning spell to destroy the tree. However, a magical shield abruptly materialized above the tree, and within its canopy, Worf espied 3 fairy children. It was through their collective efforts that the tree was protected. Meanwhile, within the carriage, troubling thoughts plagued Kalia. What had Worf forgotten in Rohaz? Akan, a small neutral kingdom northwest of Rohaz, refrained from engaging in wars or alliances. Akan was renowned for its physicians and remedies. Kalia had visited there only once, when she needed to procure medicine for the troops. It was during that time she had crossed paths with Prince Worf. Initially, she had taken a disliking to him, and a conflict had even arisen between them. The carriage had already arrived at the next waypoint of swift transition. While Kalia continued to ponder over Prince Worf, she resolved to warn her temporary deputy, Brick, about him. Requesting Hamming's presence, she tuned the communication crystal. In response, Brick conveyed that Simon was searching for her, having turned the entire empire upside down and laid waste to her estate. Kalia, on the other hand, informed him of the arrival of Prince Akan in the city of Antic, beseeching him to relay this information to Prince Rohaz. Furthermore, she asked him to inform Simon of her presence in Antic. Simon would arrive in Antic and encounter Worf there. He would undoubtedly unravel his plans. Moreover, as Simon was a half-elf, he would be able to perceive the fairies and protect them. Meanwhile, as he made his way here, the travelers would have ample time to depart. Kalia set off immediately. They'd raced without respite for 2 days, relying on scrolls and the carriage to traverse over 900 kilometers. Her companions began to suffer from the constant movement. Finally, Kalia took pity on them and guided them to an inn where they were warmly received. Simon swiftly arrived in Antic as soon as Brick informed him of Kalia's presence there. Alas, he did not find Kalia, but instead beheld the fairy tree. Some powerful enchantment had been cast upon it, capable of obliterating the tree. Yet it was shielded by 3 tiny fairy children perched upon its branches. Simon was perplexed. He understood that Kalia had summoned him there for a reason. He needed to ascertain which audacious mage had dared to destroy the fairy tree. Sensing traces of teleportation magic, Simon employed a special spell that allowed him to follow the trail. It transported him to a forest where he discovered a lifeless fairy. She had been struck by a lightning bolt to her chest. It was Melina. Simon contacted Derek and requested his presence at these coordinates to retrieve the corpse. Meanwhile, he returned to the fairy tree to erect a powerful protective shield over it. Finally, the fairy children could rest. One of them told Simon that he emitted the same bright light as the beautiful person who had recently visited. Could they be referring to Kalia? But fairies disappear without giving answers. In the meantime, Kalia couldn't sleep and went out for a walk. Suddenly, Dr. Allen crossed her path. He was walking and crying. Suddenly, he embraced Kalia and begged her forgiveness for not protecting her. In doing so, he called Kalia Nadia, which was his wife's name. She died during childbirth. Since then, Allen has dedicated himself to midwifery. It seems he walks in his sleep, haunted by his deceased wife. Kalia shook the doctor and woke him up. Allen realized what had happened. He felt ashamed. But Kalia told him he had nothing to be ashamed of. He still loves his wife. Allen asked if Kalia loved the father of her child. Kalia explained that their relationship is complicated. She decided to give birth alone because she doesn't know how the father will react to the child. Allen believes that Kalia will be a good mother. The owner of the inn where Kalia stayed inquired about her pregnancy. She was surprised that a pregnant woman was traveling alone without her husband. Hamming and Allen were introduced as brother and sister. Kalia realized that she needed to come up with a story. She told the innkeeper that she had fled from her husband because he constantly drinks, gambles, and abuses her. She asked the innkeeper not to reveal anything about her if someone comes looking for her. The innkeeper agreed. Meanwhile, Simon was restless. He tried to find Kalia, but to no avail. The prince was concerned about Simon's state of mind and suggested investigating the dead fairy case to distract himself. Simon told the prince that a foreign aristocrat had purchased an ancient fortress near the fairy forest in the empire. It is said that he collects fairies. However, such treatment of this race is unacceptable. It violates the treaty between the races. The case needs to be investigated, but Simon refuses to do it. He has more important matters to attend to at the moment. The mages do not obey the emperor and only help involuntarily. Moreover, Simon cannot accept that the prince knew about Callia's departure and didn't tell him. Simon returned to the magical tower. To find Callia, he needed to understand the nature of the dead fairy they discovered. His assistant informed him that the genetics of this fairy were peculiar. She was closer to a banshee, although she didn't resemble one externally. Furthermore, she clearly couldn't control her magical power, which should come as naturally to fairies as breathing. The conclusion is that it's a chimera's corpse. Simon remembered the enigmatic aristocratic collector. It seems he will have to take on this case. Callia arrives in the southern coastal town of Lua. 4 years ago, they were here together with Simon, and now she plans to settle here with his child. She has already rented a house under the name of Lia Raymond. Every day, Callia reads the newspapers, and Simon frequently appears in them. First, with the news of him destroying Callia's estate. Then, he unleashed his magical energy completely and nearly died. Is it all just to find Callia? Meanwhile, Callia develops a voracious appetite. She eats constantly and wants more. Dr. Allen tries to convince her that it's harmful, but to no avail. Callia is experiencing the tranquility of life for the first time. Hamming told her that the town of Lua hosts a festival in the spring, and Callia decided to participate in it. Everyone around her cares for her. If it weren't for the issue with Simon, she would be happy. Simon occasionally appears in her dreams. In the dream, he confesses his love to her and wants a child with her. Upon waking, Callia feels ashamed of these dreams. She still considers Simon a friend. Dr. Allen has the ability to examine the fetus inside the womb using his hands. He regularly observes the baby's development. At 9 months, he was able to accurately determine the baby's gender. It will be a boy for Callia. She even came up with a name for him, Shasha. Shasha was growing big, and it worried Allen. He feared that it would be challenging for Callia to give birth to such a large baby. Spring arrived, and the town was preparing for the festival. Beautiful flowers called rohatias bloomed all around, and the festival was named after them. During the festival, the city authorities opened access to the sacred fairy forest, which is usually closed to humans. Tourists love to visit it. Callia, Allen, and Hamming strolled through the festival town. Sweet treats were being sold everywhere. Hamming took out her wallet and rushed to the nearest stall for candies. While everyone was eating, she suggested having a thoroughly enjoyable day and promised to pay for everything from her own pocket. But when she reached for her wallet, it was nowhere to be found. Allen came to the rescue. He gave his wallet, and Hamming offered to pay for everything the next day. While on a business trip, a day before Callia's escaped, Simon, along with his comrades from the Order of Magicians, was examining the integrity of magical circles. He reduced the duration of the work from a month to 2 weeks in order to return to Callia as soon as possible. In a distant southern port, he came across a rare artifact, a pink pearl. It is said to symbolize eternal love and loyalty, and it is believed that the person to whom it is given will die on the same day as the one who presented it. Simon immediately acquires the pearl. He intends to give it to Callia upon his return. But when he returned, Callia had already fled. Now Simon sits in his room, contemplating why it turned out this way. Callia became everything to him after she saved him. Why didn't she notice his love all these years? If he had given her the pearl slightly earlier, perhaps she wouldn't have run away. Meanwhile, in Lua, Callia doesn't waste any time. She is teaching combat skills to Hamming. The training sessions are long and grueling, leaving Hamming sleepy throughout the day. But they are worth it. Hamming herself refused to go to anyone else. She wanted to be only with Callia. On the day of the festival, the girls strolled through the city and enjoyed themselves. They commissioned artists to paint their portraits. While the artists were working on them, Callia heard a child's cry. A ragged and dirty little girl ran up to her mother and told her that her friends had entered the fairy forest and hadn't returned. The worried mother went to seek help from the guards. Callia and Hamming hurriedly went home. One of the missing girls was the daughter of their housemaid. Kalia immediately released her and sent Hamming and Alan to accompany the guards in monitoring the situation. Kalia herself stayed at home. When Hamming returned, she reported that the children had been missing for 2 hours already, having climbed over the fence in search of a balloon and vanished into the forest. The fairy forest was dark and frightening. Even adults find it difficult to return from it. If the children ventured too deep, trouble awaits them. There is not enough security to find them in time. Moreover, sunset is approaching, and after sunset, the fairy forest becomes particularly dreadful. That's when Kalia decides to venture into the forest herself. She is the only person in town who possesses the necessary powers and skills to save the children. For Kalia's safety, she invited Hamming to accompany her into the forest. Hamming accepted this offer with gratitude. She asked Alan to wait for them at the entrance to the forest. A conflict was already brewing there between the guards and the mothers of the lost children. The mothers were eager to search, but they were not allowed. Kalia and Hamming did not enter through the main entrance. Kalia found a weak spot in the wall and destroyed it. Hamming handed her a sword, and they set foot on Fairyland. Kalia reassured Hamming that they had nothing to fear. However, she did not mention that she had seen traces of fearsome creatures near the fence, lichen wolves. Most likely, they were outcasts in a pack, about 2 or 3 individuals. It was unclear how they managed to enter the fairy forest. The fairies despise and exclude them. Soon, one of them emerged from the thicket towards the girls. Enormous and enraged, it frightened Hamming to the core, but Kalia managed to slash it with her sword. The lichen wolf fled. However, its condition puzzled Kalia. Its eyes rolled back, and its body was covered in wounds. Something was definitely amiss. Kalia went after the wolf. It couldn't have gone far. In the fairy forest, the most dangerous thing is to get lost in illusions. Illusions arise from disputes over a special mushroom. Kalia warned Hamming to stay away from those mushrooms. Otherwise, she would inhale the spores, go insane, and die. Suddenly, Kalia spotted a fairy girl among the trees. Graceful, wearing a white dress and flowers in her hair, she waved to Kalia in a friendly manner. Hamming didn't see anyone and presumed it was an illusion. Kalia didn't know what to think. If it was an illusion, she should be seeing familiar people, but she didn't recognize the girl. If it was a fairy, it was strange for her to be alone since fairies live in groups. Moreover, she showed no fear of Kalia and dared to come closer. But Kalia had other priorities at the moment. She was searching for the children. The lichen wolf tracks abruptly stopped near a small thicket. It smelled of blood from there, and voices could be heard. As soon as Kalia moved towards it, the fairy girl emerged from behind a tree and grabbed her hand. A fluttering sensation in her stomach began to intensify. Fairy gently tugged Kalia in a different direction, smiling warmly. What did she desire? Kalia decided to follow where she was being led. After all, she possessed enough strength to handle any situation if need be. Fairy led her to a meadow adorned with exquisite pink and violet flowers, shimmering in the sun's rays. Suddenly, tiny winged girls emerged from all of them, the spirits of the flowers. Even Hamming caught sight of them. However, there were no children to be found. One spirit flew up to Fairy and whispered something in her ear. Her smile immediately vanished from her face. She held on to Kalia even tighter, but Kalia broke free. And then she noticed a trail left by a werewolf among the flowers. Together with Hamming, they followed its path. Fairy remained in the meadow, gazing at Kalia with sorrowful eyes. Suddenly, a white dove flew overhead, and she radiated with joy. The girls ventured quite deep into the forest. However, Kalia did not feel fatigue. On the contrary, she experienced an incredible lightness within the woods. It was already around 5 o'clock. They had to leave the forest before 6. Her teleportation scroll, which she had brought along, would come in handy. Although using magic in the forest was perilous for Fairy, as it could cause space-time distortions. The tracks led the girls to a cave. Kalia immediately entered, but Hamming couldn't. Some invisible barrier prevented her from doing so. They had reached the border of the deep forest, Fairy's secret domain. A magical barrier separated it from the ordinary forest, but why was Kalia able to pass through it? The werewolves were unable to do so either. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed from the depths of the cave. Hamming lunged at the barrier, and Kalia caught her and managed to transport her to her side, and they continued onward together. Meanwhile, the white dove guided the fairy girl to a large tree. A sturdy fairy warrior sat beneath it. Upon seeing the dove, he rejoiced. His joy grew even greater upon seeing the girl. He called her Gaia, his daughter, and mentioned that although he had arrived late, he brought her a gift. Gaia had no interest in the gift. She beckoned her father to follow her into the forest. He complied. The cave was dark, and Kalia utilized a pearl of light. The vaults of the cave were illuminated with a radiant glow. Hamming remained at the entrance to check for anyone, while Kalia proceeded further. In the depths of the cave, she spotted 2 werewolves. In the grasp of one of them lay an unconscious little boy. A couple of sword swings, and the wolf was vanquished. Kalia carefully placed the child on the ground. The second werewolf darted towards the cave's exit. However, Kalia swiftly hurled her sword, hitting the wolf right in the withers. Sensing movement behind her, she leaped aside just in time. Another wolf rushed past her. Kalia decided to capture it alive, but suddenly, a heavy spear with a long black shaft struck the werewolf directly, coming from the cave's entrance. Standing there, at the entrance to the cave, was Gaia's father. Judging by the spear, he was none other than Calexiza, the fairy king, the father of all creation. Gaia approached Kalia with a joyful smile. Kalia introduced herself. Calexiza cast a spell and extracted a spear from the Lycan wolf. Along with it flew a resplendent blue crystal. The king waved his hand, and the crystal dispersed into the wind. He declared it to be a fairy soul. Someone is extracting fairy souls and transplanting them into demonic creatures, commonly known as chimeras. The history of creating chimeras is ancient. Many magicians and scholars among humans have been intrigued by chimeras. It was believed that they would help prolong life. The study of chimeras leads to madness, yet people continue to engage in it. Could someone from Luo have done this? But who? And why didn't Kalia witness the immense wave of magical energy that should have arisen from it? Gaia approached Kalia once again and began caressing her face. Kalia inquired of the king why she was doing so. He replied that it was because of the magical crystal. Every fairy possesses one from birth. Usually, the crystal develops alongside the fairy. However, there are instances where it fails to keep up with their physical growth. Such is the case with Gaia, the youngest daughter of Calexiza. She was born small and frail, yet kind-hearted and responsive. The king cared for her above all else. Then she fell in love with a human. Calexiza banished her from the forest because of it, and his daughter perished. The fairy now beside them, however, was created from a fragment of Gaia's crystal. Yet only those connected to them can see fairies like her. Calexiza glanced at Kalia, raised his spear, and sternly asked who she was, since she could see Gaia. Gaia immediately pushed Kalia's spear aside with a decisive gesture and lunged at her father with clenched fists. Both Calexiza and Kalia were taken aback. The king awkwardly apologized. At that moment, Hamming held the children in her arms. She staunched their wounds as best she could, but they wouldn't last long. They needed to be taken to the village. The girl held a huge red egg in her hands, almost the size of her. There was no time to wait for Kalia. Hamming would do it herself. Suddenly, a colossal Lycan wolf appeared before her. Too close. Hamming wouldn't have time to grab her sword. She had already bid farewell to her life when suddenly the red egg illuminated with a bright light, forcing the wolf back. Immediately, Kalia emerged from the cave and slew it with her sword. Then she examined the children. Their wounds were not deep, but demonic energy seeped from them. They needed urgent purification. King Calexiza took care of it. However, he immediately pointed his spear at the egg. It was a dragon egg. It should not be in the fairy forest, as dragons do not befriend fairies. Thus, the mother would not come for it, and the embryo would die. Calexiza demanded that the egg be given to him, but Hamming said that the egg had protected them, and Kalia could not bear the thought of ending someone's life. She said she would take the egg. The abandoned egg reminded her of herself. She had been abandoned, but she survived against all odds. The egg could survive too. Calexiza said that humans lacked the magic to protect the egg. Then Gaia stepped between him and Kalia and began infusing the egg with her magical energy. The king surrendered. He handed over the egg and also told Kalia that her child's soul shone beautifully. Then he called upon the fairy of the night, Liella, and asked her to lead the girls and children out of the forest. Suddenly, Gaia took Callia's hand. She wanted to go with her. In his magical tower, Simon read stacks of letters from a distinguished aristocrat, Marquis Auntie. He discussed the possibility of capturing and selling fairies. They were easily caught on the outskirts of the forests. Besides, Callia was absent from the palace, meaning one less dangerous enemy. A year ago, the Marquis was dying from a severe illness, but suddenly he began to recover. Surely fairies were involved. Simon summoned his two familiars, the cat Uz and the mole Tiru. He placed a black pea in the mouth of each and asked them to disperse the substance in the cities where he would send them. The familiars vanished through the portals. Simon thought about Callia again. He found a clue about her. She was pointing towards the city of Lua. In the city of Lua, a resident told Simon that he had seen a noble lady with light yellow hair. She was accompanied by a girl with a bob haircut and a caring gentleman of considerable height. This information was sufficient for Simon to set off for Lua. He was particularly concerned about the man accompanying Callia. But no matter, once he finds her, he will bind her to himself using magic. In the chamber of the mage Worf, there are numerous cells containing captive fairies. They weep and plead to be set free. But this only amuses Worf, and suddenly, what is this? Where has the telepathic connection with the Lycan wolves, whom he had made his pets, disappeared to? It appears that they have been killed. Who could have done this? Worf gazes out of the window at the city. It is the city of Lua. He must venture into the fairy forest and cleanse the magic. Otherwise, it will lead to him. Meanwhile, in the forest, Gaia telepathically sends signals to Callia. She implores her to join her, for she must protect Callia's child. Gaia is so persuasive that Calixes extends a bracelet to Callia. Within it, the soul of the ancient spirit Amuntia is infused. If the fairy leaves her mark on it, she will be able to summon her later. In case of need, Callia will be able to summon the Fairy King and Gaia. Suddenly, Calixes senses that someone has infiltrated the forest. He asks Gaia to escort the humans and not to reveal herself until he utters the code word Maya. He turns around and disappears into the forest. It seemed to Callia that he smiled at her one last time. When the girls left the forest, Callia awakened the children and sent them back to their parents. She herself, along with Hamming, returned home without revealing themselves to the humans. There, they were greeted by the anxious Alan, who was already preparing to go to the forest and rescue them. Hamming presented Alan with the inspection of a dragon's egg. He had never encountered such a thing before. However, he examined it closely. The only thing he could ascertain was that the egg was weakening. It seemed to have released energy to protect Hamming and the children, and there was no way to help it unless magical energy was infused into it. Then Callia decided to infuse her sword's energy into it. The egg quickly absorbed the mana, even causing Callia to stagger. She decided to feed it in small portions. She also mentioned the need to visit the Lord's castle and summon the mages. Meanwhile, in the forest, Calixes encountered Worf and his entourage. The king immediately sensed the malevolent energy emanating from the mage. Worf also recognized who stood before him. Suddenly, one of Worf's entourage lunged forward. It was Ruin, a chimera created from a demon. Calixes felt the demonic energy and was incensed by such blasphemy. Ruin cast a spell against the fairy king, but he vanished. Dozens of tiny fairies, spirits of the flower meadow, ascended above Worf and the chimeras. They desired to attack Worf, but with a wave of his hand, he summoned fire, burning them all and teleporting himself back to his castle. In the castle, the dark sorceress Gemma awaited him. She urged him to sign a contract that would grant him power over the demons, but Worf was cautious. He understood that it would place him in servitude to the sorceress. Jimin revealed that the dragon egg had been brought to the Lord's castle. Worf requested it be stolen. Hamming and Alan brought the egg to the castle and presented it to the Lord. Immediately, he made contact through a crystal with the nearest magical branch. They expressed great interest in the egg. However, the mages could only reach Lua in 2 weeks. Without magic, the egg would not survive beyond 3 days. Nevertheless, one of the mages mentioned that Derek, a high-level mage, and one of Simon's allies, should be nearby. He would arrive in Lua the following day. The Lord deactivated the crystal. Then Alan approached him, confessing that he and Hamming had found the egg 2 days ago. Apparently, through the hole they had left in the fence, the children had managed to enter the forest. Alan felt guilty, so he asked the Lord to inform the mages that he had found the egg, without mentioning him and Hamming. The Lord agreed. However, as soon as Hamming handed him the egg, he was struck by a lightning bolt. The Lord was not seriously harmed, but everyone was extremely surprised. The Lord declared that the egg did not want to remain there and suggested guarding it in the castle until the arrival of the mages. At that moment, Hamming noticed that the Lord's pupils had transformed into narrow vertical slits. The azure-eyed sorcerer Derek was relaxing on the beach. It was the 4th day of his vacation. Suddenly, his magical crystal started summoning him. He activated it, and a mage appeared on the communication channel, informing him about a dragon egg in Lua. Derek was the closest to the city and had to retrieve the egg. The dragon hatchling would soon emerge, so a substantial amount of magic was required. Derek was instructed to bring another mage along. He was offered to journey to the city of Arno, where a powerful mage resided. Derek swiftly prepared himself and departed. In Arno, he was greatly astonished. It turned out that the formidable mage he was supposed to bring with him was none other than Simon himself. Derek felt disappointed. He had desired to be the first mage to witness the dragon's birth. The dragon might even grant him its mark, which would be a tremendous stroke of luck. Simon appeared before Derek, surrounded by spirits who had made a pact with him. There were 3 of them, a serpent, a bird, and a cat. The only one missing was the 4th, the mole. However, Simon explained that they were heading exactly where he had gone. They would retrieve the egg, while Derek would transport it to the tower. Meanwhile, in the Lua forest, the spirit of the mole emerged from beneath the ground and observed a nearby girl strolling. It was Kalia Taxicate. Kalia ventured into the forest, concerned about the news of a fire. She was particularly worried about Gaia. In the woods, she encountered fairies who informed her that Gaia was safe. Gaia had fallen into a slumber to gather her strength. Kalia felt reassured. However, suddenly, her child began to move vigorously in her abdomen. She hurriedly made her way back home, and the spirit of the mole followed her underground. At home, the housekeeper greeted her along with her daughter. The young girl asked if Kalia had truly saved her, but Kalia didn't want to reveal her identity and denied everything. Nevertheless, the housekeeper had already deduced the truth. She also informed Kalia that Hamming and Alan would remain with the Lord until tomorrow. That's what her husband, the castle guard, had overheard. The housekeeper departed, leaving Kalia alone. She was troubled by the movements in her belly. Could it be that she would have to give birth today, without a doctor or Hamming? Meanwhile, in the Lord's castle, Alan and Hamming were locked inside the hall. Alan worried about Kalia, but what troubled him even more was the possibility of Kalia coming to the castle. It could expose her true identity. Alan knocked on the door while Hamming stood by the window, holding the egg in her hands. Suddenly, the doctor collapsed. A dense black shadow appeared beneath the door, and then the door swung open. The Lord stood on the threshold, his eyes empty. The Lord seized Hamming's hand. She attempted to break free but failed. With her other hand, she held onto an egg, making it difficult to resist. Finally, she managed to kick the Lord in the abdomen. He fell, and beneath him, a black shadow emerged once again, advancing towards Hamming. She recoiled in fear, and the shadow pursued her. Overwhelmed by fear, Hamming closed her eyes and cried out, proclaiming that Lady Kalia would avenge her. A crack resounded in the air, and someone called Lady Kalia's name. Hamming opened her eyes. Simon and Derek stood at the threshold. The shadow was vanquished by a magical lightning bolt. Hamming was filled with astonishment. How did Simon end up here? The Archmage approached Hamming and demanded to know the whereabouts of Kalia. At that moment, the Lord's wife entered the hall accompanied by guards. She immediately ordered the Lord to be carried to his chambers. Alan regained consciousness and rushed to assist the Lord. Simon, meanwhile, continued to await an answer. Finally, everyone departed, leaving only Simon, Alan, and Hamming. Both claimed ignorance regarding Kalia's location, but Simon sensed their deception. They remained in the hall for a while longer. It was then that Hamming mustered the courage to inquire of Simon why he sought Kalia. He confessed that he would go mad and perish without her. Hamming realized that Simon loved Kalia and decided to accompany him to her. Inadvertently, she remarked that the situation brooked no delay. This stirred Simon's emotions. However, he understood why Alan accompanied Kalia everywhere. His jealousy subsided, but apprehension arose. What had happened to Kalia? Suddenly, a mole spirit appeared in the hall. It told Simon that it had encountered the woman he was seeking near the fairy forest. Simon cast a spell and saw her. It was Kalia. At her home, Kalia felt discomfort in her abdomen and eagerly awaited Alan. Then she decided to descend to the ground floor and wait for him there. As she reached the lower level, there was a sudden knock on the door. Kalia wasn't expecting anyone, so she armed herself with a sword, prepared to wait cautiously. However, the pangs in her stomach made it difficult for her to stand properly. She cried out, and the door swung open, revealing Simon rushing into the house. They gazed at each other in astonishment for a while. Finally, Simon asked about the condition of her abdomen. When Simon finally understood that Kalia was pregnant, he inquired if it had happened after that night. However, Kalia responded in the negative and immediately collapsed from intense contractions. Simon caught her, and she demanded that Alan be brought to her. Simon lifted her in his arms, created a portal, and stepped into it. The portal transported them to the castle hall. Simon laid Kalia on the couch, and Alan immediately attended to her. Hamming went to the Lord's wife to search for a suitable room for the childbirth. Simon returned to Kalia's house and brought Alan his medical bag. Soon, Hamming returned with the Lord's wife. She offered her own room for the birthing process and summoned her maidservants to assist. Alan settled Kalia in the bed, with Hamming by her side as her attendant. Simon was tasked with sitting nearby, providing moral support to the expectant mother. He would join them once the waters broke. Simon sat beside Kalia, clasping her hand, yearning to absorb all of her pain. Suddenly, Kalia began to tremble and grasp his hands. Simon endeavored to assist her as much as possible. Meanwhile, Kalia remembered the bracelet gifted by the Fairy King and realized it was time to activate it. She called upon Gaia, and the fairy promptly appeared by the bedside. However, she startled Simon, who swiftly erected a protective field around the bed, demanding to know who she was and why she had come. But just then, Chalexia herself materialized nearby. She explained that they had come to aid the birth of new life. Reluctant to dispel the field, Simon insisted on Kalia personally requesting it. When the field dissipated, the bed instantly became enveloped in ivy vines, and grass sprouted while flowers bloomed around it. Gaia rushed to Kalia and embraced her, while Chalexia proclaimed that she shared her innate power. However, Gaia bestowed so much upon Kalia that the king grew fearful for her own safety. She was meant to give the child a fairy stone, but she only possessed a fragment. Hence, the king chipped off a piece from his own stone and presented it to the child, stating that such an act could only be done for those with the blood of the Fairy King. Kalia was astonished. It meant that she had fairy blood flowing within her. How could such a thing be? But there was no time to ponder as her water broke, and contractions intensified in frequency and intensity. Hamming and Alan were summoned by the fairies. However, soon everyone had to leave, leaving the doctor alone with the expectant mother. From the room, only Kalia's cries could be heard. Then, suddenly, everyone distinctly heard the wailing of a newborn baby. They all rushed into the room. Alan held a robust and beautiful boy weighing 4.5 kilograms in his arms. However, he soon handed the baby over to the mother. Kalia held him close to her, overwhelmed with joy. Kalia drifted off to sleep, while Simon remained by her side. He gently caressed her face and kissed her hands. Kalia woke at his touch and finally let her astonishment have its expression. What was Simon doing here, and why was he behaving in such a manner? Hamming sat with little Sasha in the chamber while Kalia rested. Suddenly, an intense drowsiness overwhelmed her. She promptly settled upon a chair and drifted into slumber. It was then that Chalexia materialized in the room. It was he who induced sleep in Hamming. He needed to bestow the king's blessing upon the child, for Sasha belonged to the fairy folk. This occupation is what led Kalia and Simon, who had entered the chamber, to discover them. A golden radiance filled the room, accompanied by the words of the Fairy King. He wished nothing but the best for the child throughout life. Sealing his blessing with a kiss upon the child's forehead, the king's words synchronized with the luminous glow. Suddenly, the baby's eyes lit up with a vivid green light. The infant reached out and grasped Calixige's nose. The Fairy King was utterly delighted. However, as soon as he took Sasha in his arms, the infant burst into tears. The sound of weeping awakened Hamming. She leaped to her feet, perplexed at how everyone had gathered in the room so swiftly. She then mentioned that it was time for Sasha to be fed. Kalia took him and proceeded to the adjacent chamber for nursing. Simon offered his support, holding Kalia's hand. Once everyone had departed, Calixia cast an incantation and detected a lurking demonic shadow in the corner. He enacted a few more spells and brought the shadow into his service. Immediately, he instructed the shadow to return to its former master and recount everything it had witnessed, except for this particular moment. The shadow departed through the window. He approached Kalia, tenderly touched her, and inquired empathetically if everything was in order. She replied affirmatively, yet she herself did not recognize Simon. Why was he so caring? Why wasn't he angry? Why didn't he inquire about her pregnancy? Alan departed, and Kalia decided to officially introduce the child to Simon. She named him Sasha. However, this was a temporary name, as she would contemplate a permanent one. Simon reminded her that she used to call him Sasha when they were children. Kalia had no recollection of that. Simon leaned over the baby and playfully tickled his finger. Kalia was surprised, as he used to despise children. Finally, Simon asked why she had left without warning and given birth to the child. Kalia responded that she simply wanted to rest, but Simon asked directly, was the child his? For a moment, Kalia pondered. The ducal family would not accept this child. Sasha would never be a Turlone. He was a Taxicate, first and foremost her child, and Simon would undoubtedly encounter problems. Therefore, the only correct answer was no. No, this child was not Simon's. Then Simon asked who the father of the child was. Kalia replied that it was inconsequential, but Simon had already realized that no one but him could be the father. It's just that Kalia, for some reason, did not want to see him as Sasha's father. Perhaps she didn't trust him or couldn't envision a shared future. But Simon was ready to open up to her. He decided to change his strategy. Previously, he had hoped that Kalia would see his feelings on her own. Well, that was a mistake. Simon embraced Kalia and confessed his love for her. Kalia was bewildered, but it's all right. Soon she would understand his words. Kalia needed assurances, while Simon had behaved like a child. He teased and hinted, but never spoke directly. That's why Kalia had been afraid to tell him about the child. Now he would act differently. He would proclaim his love to the whole world. He would prove himself to be a worthy father to Sasha, and Kalia would love him.